Hey there, good evening, folks. This is Deeksha Janiani, and I'm representing Trendline. This week, we understand how inflationary trends witnessed for commodities like crude oil, vegetable oils, wheat, barley, and gold is correlated with the performance of FMCG companies as well as jewelry makers. One thing to note here is that Nifty FMCG index underperformed the broader Nifty 50 benchmark for each of the last 5 quarters. Why is this so? Because of the unprecedented inflationary trend witnessed by FMCG companies as well as subdued demand conditions in India, especially the rural India, because rural people are more price sensitive than their urban counterparts. Another thing is that raw material expenses of these companies see a clear spike when inflation strikes them, and which ultimately dents the gross margins of these companies. So let's find out what are the key raw materials for these FMCG companies. For companies like Hindustan Unilever and Godrej Consumer, palm fatty acids, fats and resins, chemicals, tea leaves are the key inputs for their home care and personal care segment. For food makers like Britannia and Nestle, palm oil again, skim milk powder, sugar, and wheat flour make the key inputs for their products. For company like Marico, copra is the key input which is used to manufacture the parachute hair oil which we all love. And for ITC, leaf tobacco is the key input used for cigarette manufacturing. For consumer discretionary leader like Titan Company, gold, precious metals, diamonds, and stones are the ones which are used to manufacture gold and diamond jewelry for all you ladies out there. So let's find out what is the historical price trajectory of some of these key raw materials. You won't believe it, but palm oil prices have jumped 55% in the last 12 months. In last 4 months alone, they have jumped over 30% owing to the European crisis. Now there's one more story which played out here. So Indonesia and Malaysia are the major exporters of palm oil. Indonesian government placed some export restrictions on palm oil so as to secure its own domestic supplies. So there was a supply constraint. Another thing which happened was that there were some disruptions in the exports of sunflower oil from Black Sea ports. So people turned to palm oil as an alternative. So there was higher demand. So higher demand and constraint of supply, basically the prices of this commodity shot up. Another important thing that we need to note here is that India is a surplus producer of commodities like wheat, tea, coffee, milk, etc., and it exports these to all over the world. So while wheat prices jumped over 60% since the European crisis began, back home the wholesale price inflation was only 4%. So we were in surplus, it didn't impact us that much. But what hit Indian FMCG companies was the rise in palm oil prices as well as the jump in crude oil prices, which is connected to their packaging costs. And these companies were witnessing inflation even before the European crisis began. So naturally, they undertook aggressive price hikes to protect their margins. You can see that there are brands like Lux, Godrej number one, which have seen over 30% price hike in FY22. And across categories, it's like more than 20% for some soap and shampoo and detergent categories. And in spite of these price hikes, the companies were not exactly successful in protecting their margins. And there is a reason for that, folks. Basically, they haven't been able to pass on the entire inflationary pressure onto the end consumer. The margins, the gross margins got contracted by over 3.5% percentage points Q3 FY22 on a year-on-year basis. The companies clearly wanted to protect their sales, sustain their sales volume, as well as maintain their margins and basically have a happy balance between both. But their margins have suffered. In fact, analysts believe that their margins are going to contract by over 260 basis points in Q4 FY22 on a year-on-year basis. And while they haven't passed on the entire input cost inflation onto their consumers, their volumes have still suffered. So why I say that they haven't passed the entire burden is because there is a difference between the wholesale price inflation and CPI inflation for, say, commodity like oil. While oilseeds prices have risen by 22.5% on wholesale level, price of oils and fats on retail level have risen by 18.5% only. So there is the gap that you find. And coming back to the volume growth point, if you see, the volume growth has has reduced from Q1 FY22 itself. And for soap makers, analysts estimate that it's going to fall in Q4 FY22. And another thing is, Marico came out with its latest business update. And in spite of the fact that copra faced a deflation and the company reduced prices of parachute coconut oil, it is still staring at a flat volume growth in Q4 FY22. So, all in all, the volume growth is going to be either flat for some companies or it's going to fall for some other companies. So, the sales growth in Q4 FY22 is going to be primarily driven by price hikes that these companies have taken. That is by higher realization. It's going to be just 9 to 10%. And volume has little to no part, has no or little part to play in this rise. Another thing, if you see the profit growth, which is expected for Q4 FY22, it's just going to be between 3 to 4% on a year-on-year basis, because these companies are also staring at a gross margin contraction. And if you apply that, the profit growth is it's going to be lackluster. Moving on to gold prices. So people flock to the yellow metal when there are higher inflationary pressures. It's considered as a safe haven asset, and which is why it has jumped 13% between January end and March mid. This has clearly impacted the sales of jewelry segment of Titan company. So the jewelry sales fell 4% year on year, impacting the overall revenue also, which fell 3% on a year-on-year basis. And this is just I'm telling on the company front. On the industry front, the situation was even more dire. There was a material fall in sales witnessed for February and March 2022, with certain pockets witnessing 50 to 60% fall in sales. Clearly, the consumers are reducing the spends on their luxuries because of food and fuel price inflation. So that's one important thing to note. It's higher gold prices, the diamond prices have jumped by 30 to 40%, and basically people are holding back their luxury spends. So that's one important thing. All in all, the FMCG companies have had a clear impact on the front of their margins and volumes, and this impact is going to be seen for H1 FY23 as well. But apart from the FMCG companies, the final consumers are also bearing the brunt, because it's a trickle down effect ultimately. So the consumer price inflation level for oil, for certain oils like sunflower oil, palm oil, soya oil, was around 18.5% on a year on year basis in March 2022. In fact, local circle believes that around 25% of people have cut back on their expenditure for edible oil. Clearly, consumers are feeling the pinch of higher prices. In fact, the consumer price inflation rose to almost 7% levels in March 2022, and analysts from Acuity believe that it is going to hover at those levels for next few months. And even RBI has increased its inflation forecasts. So clearly, there is more pain in store for the consumers out there. This is my time. Thank you so very much, and have a great evening.